Welcome to Table for One, Episode 4. This week, we're talking about Star Trek Frontiers, Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, and the Manhattan Project Chain Reaction, plus board game apps and solo play. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Table for One. This is Anthony, and this is the podcast about solo gaming and all things that go with it. Whether it's picking up stuff to pimp out your game, or painting, or just hanging out with your kids and learning new ones. This week, I am going to talk about 2 or 3 games I've been playing lately, but I'm also going to dive into something else that kind of popped in my head just recently. I got a new iPhone. Yes, I'm one of those people. I got a new iPhone. And the reason why actually wasn't because the old one was a problem. It's because it didn't have enough storage. The 16 gigs is nothing, especially because I'm trying to record more videos. I don't yet have the funds for a nice DSLR camera. So I use the iPhone. It does pretty well. But 16 gigs was not cutting it. I couldn't even get a 30-minute video in. So I got the new one with the full, as much storage as you can possibly have, 256. And because of that, I was able to download basically every app I've ever purchased. Still only filled like a third of the thing up. And I realized how many board game apps there are. So this week I wanted to talk about some of my favorites and kind of how that makes me feel versus playing a nice solo game, something tactile, analog, as Drew would say, and kind of what the difference is and what my preferences are, because there are very different situations for both. I will say that I'm not a huge fan of one over the other in certain situations, and vice versa. Sometimes I just want to play with cards. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll put the call out to you guys to kind of let me know what you think as well on that topic. Before we dive into all that, I kind of just wanted to lament. I don't really have any news this week. I've been kind of off the radar. Kids started school this month. Everybody was sick for a couple weeks. I'm just getting back up on my feet and way behind on all my board gaming news. But just looking at the list that popped up here that I have on my desktop to keep me appraised of all the things that I either need to check out or purchase or review, I'm realizing that my queue for the fall is actually starting to shape up to be pretty significant. And keep in mind, I'm not going to Essen, so I'm not going to be getting any of those games in my hands. But it's got me thinking just how much good stuff out there is coming out with a solo version already baked into the game. And that's not even counting games that are optimized by fans or have solo variants built for them or whatever else comes out. But just going down the hotness on the top games on Board Game Geek, probably half of the first 20 can be played solo. That's ridiculous. I'm fairly certain it did not used to be that way. So, and I probably own half of these, which is, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. But I know coming up soon, I'm very excited to get looking down the list here. We've got Robinson Crusoe, the new version coming out. I never actually got my hands on the first version from Z-Man. Every time I was interested in it or could afford it, it was out of print. So I will be snagging the Portal version of the game with the real rules that you can read. We got the Arkham Horror card game. That's coming very soon. Definitely have that on pre-order as well. A Feast for Odin, Rosenberg's newest. So we can see just what he throws into that box. And it's supposed to be even bigger and more ridiculous than the last time around. We have all these other games on here that aren't even solo, but I've either pre-ordered or greatly looking forward to. Great Western Trail. Talked about that on Board Gamers Anonymous a little bit. Innis. We have Harry Potter, Hogwarts Battle. Yes, it's Harry Potter. Yes, it's USAopoly. Yes, it's real screen caps. And yet, the game is pretty good. And it does play solo. So I might actually be talking about that pretty soon. And then just everything else coming out at Essen. It's a ridiculous list. And already I'm preparing for the time next year when that app comes out for Imperial Assault that I just convert this podcast to the Imperial Assault playthrough podcast. If you're up for that, let me know. But it's going to be a very interesting next couple of months, because about a year ago when I first started thinking about this podcast, I wasn't sure if I could fill it up every week. And now I feel like I'm falling behind every week. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm very excited about it. So let's talk about some stuff then, if I'm so excited. Let's dive in and start talking about some of the games that I've been playing lately. I've been teasing Star Trek Frontiers for the last couple of episodes, mostly because it's been sitting on my table waiting for me to play it for the last couple of episodes. And this is a game that I picked up a while back. It's been sitting there. It's been waiting for me for a long time. And with the exception of going through and pointing out the differences between the two games and kind of lightly playing through it a little bit, I hadn't really dove into it much. There's good reason for that. I picked it up, very excited. Vlaada Chvátil, Mage Knight, Andrew Parks, Star Trek, lots of good stuff on the box cover. But it was pretty evident pretty quickly that the game is not really any different than Mage Knight with a couple of minor exceptions. So, I put it off because I have Mage Knight, I've played it a bunch, I love it, but it's just not been in my rotation lately. There's a lot of other games I've been playing, and this is the same thing. Also, one of my big pet peeves in gaming is when a new version of something comes out, and I know the rules to the old version really well, and I have to read the rule book, and the rule book is really long. So, having to go back through another Mage Knight caliber rule book after several years of not having to do that, having known the rules, was a little bit frustrating, just to find the little bits that are different. If I'd waited a little bit, I could have just watched a video or two. A lot of people did that for us. But suffice it to say, Star Trek Frontiers is very much the same as Mage Knight. I'm not going to go through everything that makes it different. There is an article on BoardGamersAnonymous.com from a couple months back where I kind of dive in and talk about the differences between the two. And there's a really good article on Ricky Royal's website, too, where he really, really dives in, having played both a lot more than I have. But, the basic stuff that's different, we have the night cycle is gone. There's no day-night. Of course, you're in space. That makes sense. The dice have changed a little bit. Some of the dynamics are changed in terms of when you have to move on to a space versus not having to move on to a space. You're always going to get experience for exploring. A couple of other small things, like it's streamlined in a few tiny areas, but not so many areas that it's less dense or complex than Mage Knight. It's still very much the same game. They just made a few thematic shifts to make it make more sense for Star Trek. And I like that. I'm fine with that. It just doesn't feel like enough of a different game to justify picking this up if you already have Mage Knight. Now, I could go through, I could talk through the playthrough and give it a full review, but Mage Knight has been out for so long and there are so many good reviews out there, and I'm probably going to go through and do a much more in-depth coverage of this and Mage Knight together, just because I've never done it and I'd love to cover them both. Just a hint, I really, really like Mage Knight, so that means I also really like Star Trek Frontiers. Don't take this as me saying I don't like the game or you shouldn't get it. I think Star Trek Frontiers is a fantastic game, but it's fantastic because it's based on an already fantastic game. So what you're getting here is more good stuff. If you have Mage Knight already and love it and don't care too much about the Star Trek theming, zero reason to go spend another $80. Also, they just re-released all of the Mage Knight expansions that have been out of print. So there's more content available for Mage Knight than there is for Star Trek Frontiers. There are no expansions yet for this. So that's another big thing to keep in mind. You're going to get more stuff if you pick up Mage Knight and everything that comes with it. So Star Trek Frontiers, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I've played it several times. It's actually set up on the table right now. I am looking at it, and I love the little WizKids quality starships and board cubes and everything that goes with that. There's a couple little thematic hiccups that don't quite make sense. You've probably read plenty on the data crystals, because what's a data crystal? But beyond that, it's a really good game. And if you don't have either and you really like Star Trek, definitely check this out. Of all the Star Trek games that came out this year, this is the only one that has a true solo mode in it. So if you're a solo gamer and like Star Trek, this is definitely something to put on your shelf. If you're indifferent about Star Trek or just don't really care or actively dislike it, there's not enough here to justify checking it out over Mage Knight. All right, the next game on my list that I wanted to talk about is Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. Now, this is a game that has been out now for almost 2 months. It came out at Gen Con this year, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And I won't say that I was surprised they did it. This whole move towards apps and changing how we play games. Fantasy Flight's been kind of at the forefront of that for a year or two now, with XCOM and then the Road to Legend with Descent. But this is just a whole nother level. I think what they did with Descent was brilliant. They brought that game back. They're selling more of it than ever before. People are hunting it down. Solo gamers are eating that up, and I am eagerly anticipating the Imperial Assault version because I don't own any Descent stuff, and I'm not going to go buy it when I have all the Star Wars stuff on my shelf. What that did for that game, this does for Mansions of Madness and then some, because it shows what's going to be capable in all of these types of games. Even more so, it gets me really excited for what we're going to see in future games that are not existing. I know it makes sense. It's lower production cost, lower development time to take an existing game system and just operate it, optimize it into an app, like they did with Descent and now Mansions of Madness. But the first time we get a big Ameritrash game that takes up a whole table and uses an app natively that was built that way, I think we're going to be blown away, because what they're doing with stuff that already exists is amazing. So anyways, Mansions of Madness, it's very much what you remember. Everybody gets a character. They have their traits. You're going to move around this board. You're going to search for items, explore different areas, interact with characters, try to track down clues, fight different creatures and cultists. And there's nothing really new about that part of it, about how the board operates or anything. What changes this so much and makes it so good for solo play especially is that the DM is gone, completely gone. Everybody gets to play a character, everybody gets to explore, everybody gets to learn what happens for the first time, and more importantly, every single game is different. You're not going to play the same scenario and have the same things pop out every time because the app randomizes it. We had the game crash on us the first time we played through, which was not a great first interaction, but it's never happened since. Probably computer related, hopefully, knock on wood. But when we rebooted it, they gave us all different items. We had the same characters, the same scenario, all different items to start the game. It's randomized in a way that works. As you're playing, you'll notice that some of the things that pop out seem to target people who are in certain locations. It knows where you are, it knows what you're doing, and it interacts with you accordingly. There's just enough AI in there to just tweak with things and mess with you, and it's so fantastic. The puzzles are a lot of fun, and some of them are brutally difficult, and kind of the way that they expect you to do them makes it even more interesting. So playing this solo feels like it honestly feels like a cross between a video game and a board game. You're interacting with this world. It's telling you what to do. It's giving you all these guidelines, but you still have the tactile feeling of the board in front of you. You can replay each of these scenarios so many times, and you have all the miniatures and everything that goes with it, that it's just a fantastic experience, and probably the most fun I've ever had with an Ameritrash style board game, because I generally do not like these. I don't like roll, move, roll, attack, roll, move, roll, attack. But what these companies are doing with this style of game, by introducing the app, by streamlining it, by building this very sophisticated AI. So you have games like this, you have games like Zombicide Black Plague, you have games like The Others, where they're actually making those things a lot of fun for people who want to get into the game and build a strategy and are really hardcore gamers. And that's not to disparage people who just like to hang around and, eat pretzels and drink beer and have the TV on in the background and play a game for 12 hours, because that's a lot of fun too. But for solo gamers like us, having a game that's deeply involving that you can set at the table and really get into is a lot of fun. It's one of the reasons Mage Knight, Star Trek Frontiers are so popular for us. They offer that in a way that much smaller solo games cannot. So, Mansions of Madness, my biggest surprise so far of the year. Not the type of game I thought I would like. I didn't get it at Gen Con. Came around much later because I didn't expect I'd even play it, let alone like it. And it is by far one of the most interesting experiences I've had thus far. So definitely check that out. If you like Cthulhu, if you like Ameritrash, if you like this app-driven craze, check it out. If you hate all three of those things together, find someone else's copy and play first, like I did, and make sure you're into it before you invest in this. It's a big, heavy, expensive game. Not something just to go pick up on a lark, but from somebody who generally highly dislikes this and does not like Cthulhu, let me remind you, this was kind of out of left field for me and quite good. All right, so the last game I wanted to talk about is one that we picked up at Gen Con. Got a copy of this from Minion Games. They provided for us to take a look at. And that is the Manhattan Project Chain Reaction. This is the single deck box card game version of the Manhattan Project. And it can be played solo. Works quite well, actually. So the basic idea of the game is that you will have bombs set out in a tableau, as well as bomb loading cards. And you need to play chains of cards that are going to get you scientists, engineers, laborers, plutonium, and uranium. And then some combination of those resources will be needed to purchase the bombs or to load the bombs, the goal of which to being to get as many points as possible. In the base game, of course, you're racing each other to get to 10 points, I believe, first. In the solo version of the game, the goal is to get as many points as possible before the deck runs out. In a normal game, you would just reshuffle the deck if it runs out and keep going until someone hits that point marker. In the solo game, you just run through the deck once and see what you can get done. Now, I generally don't like solo games that just tell you to go for a high score based on a certain parameters. The reason I like this one, as opposed to a lot of those, is that this feels like a puzzle. This feels like, here are all the same cards. You're going to see the same cards every single game, albeit in a different order. You have all the same decisions to make. Most of the bomb cards are fairly similar, so the point values are roughly the same. And you need to optimize your decisions as much as you can to the point that you get as many points as possible. It really feels like a min-max puzzle game, which is a lot of fun for a solo gamer because it's like a Rubik's Cube style approach to a card game. You have all the same resources every time. How can you squeeze every little ounce out of it, despite the randomness that comes with the shuffle and the card draw? Each of these hands, you're only going to have 5 cards, but each of these hands is very different. Some of them will allow you to dig through the discard pile. There are a couple of combinations that I found fairly quickly that are no-brainers. You're going to do the same thing every time. You're going to dig through the discard pile. You're going to take the most powerful card out. You're going to play another card that allows you to play that card immediately. And then later you'll pull that card back out of the discard pile again. Once you know those are no-brainers, you know it's going to happen. It's not quite as frustrating. It does feel like you're having 1 or 2 decisions taken away from you during the game. And if I had any issues with this, that would probably be it. But despite that coming up almost every game, what I found is my scores vary by about 15 to 20 points, which is a pretty big variance considering every other element is the same. So I'm having a lot of fun digging through this, optimizing it. The more I play it, the more my average score is ticking up. The average game of this only takes 15, 20 minutes unless you really, really, really AP yourself out. And the game only costs $10 if you order it online. So if you like the Manhattan Project, if you like that puzzly min-max style card game, or if you just want something that's smaller, doesn't take up a ton of space on the table, and that you can finish pretty quickly, card game style, then I would consider checking out the Manhattan Project Chain Reaction. This is a really good, light, accessible card game. It captures the theme of the Manhattan Project, but not quite as heavily. So if you were a little turned off by some of, the things that you had to do or what you were acting out in that game, it's not quite as prevalent here. And just the mechanics of it and the way the cards chain together works really well. So it's worth checking out. All right, guys. So the last thing I wanted to talk about today was board game apps and solo play. So the majority of board games that I talk about on this podcast, which is, 99% of what we talk about, are games that either designed to be played alone or have a variant in which the game, places a challenge or an AI against you to play alone. Apps are a little bit different. And the reason why is because you can turn any board game into a solo experience with an AI. If you have a computer-based opponent, so it's like you're playing the 2-player version of the game, then it's instantly a solo game, which if you think about it is what a board game does when it has a solo variant. It creates some form of AI. The The Automa decks in the Stonemaier games are a prime example because those are effectively card-based AI that play against you based on the decisions you make. So what I wanted to talk about was kind of some of the apps that I've been playing a lot, and the reason why, and then kind of the situations in which I prefer a board game, card game versus an app. The reason this popped up too is I downloaded a ton of apps to my phone the other day, mostly because I got all this extra space. What I realized is that despite the fact that they're all here, I don't play most of them that often, and about half of them don't really have solo versions in cardboard form. So it was interesting that there were so many different types. The most recent one that I've been playing a lot is the Paperback app, which does have a fantastic solo mode, and I was actually quite disappointed to find that the app does not have that solo mode. Instead, the app has you play against an AI opponent who is either smart or smarter. Neither one of them is that smart. I would say I can beat the smart opponent every single time, unless I have a horrible card draws, and the smarter one about half to 75% of the time. And I'm decently good at word games, but I'm not a genius here who knows every word under the sun either. So it was a little frustrating because the solo version of it forces you basically to play against yourself in kind of a race. And I really enjoy that, to play that in the card version. But I still enjoy that app, and I think the reason why is just because it's a fun game. It shortens it significantly. You get to play, a game that would normally take an hour with everybody trying to think through all their different words. It's only your AP that slows it down. The AI is going to figure out what its words are almost instantly. You get to take as much time as you want. You can come back and play the game intermittently. You can save it. There's not that pressure to be on your game quite as much. Some of the other ones that I've been playing a lot recently, I did download the Rebellion 1775, or I guess 1775 Rebellion app on Steam. Yes, I did pay the ridiculous $20 for that. And this is another game that doesn't have a solo variant, and it plays 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, I guess. And the computer version of the game, again, very quick. The opponent makes their decisions very quickly, and it does feel like a legitimate solo challenge as you try to figure out where they're going to go and plan for all the different possible situations. It's less of a bluffing game because you're playing against the computer, and it's more of a mitigation game. You have to build up your lines of defense and mitigate against what the computer might do because you don't really know what they're going to do. They're technically looking for maximum effect, but at the same time, there's some random luck to that. That is also a lot of fun. It's a lot longer, though. You're looking at a couple hours per game, even with the computer involved. So that one's an interesting one. Another very interesting game that doesn't quite work, I think because of the AI, is Twilight Struggle. Now, I know this has been improved a lot of late, but I still, playing through that game, I find myself very frustrated with the AI or lack thereof at some times. Some of the decisions made just don't make a lot of sense. And one of the reasons that game is so good is that it works well with two players playing off each other, knowing what the other is going to do, knowing what their strategy is, trying to guess what it is, playing with and without the cards that come up. So when it makes an oddball decision, it's fun because you're like, oh, I get to do the thing I wanted. But at the same time, it's a little disappointing because you're playing a long game and the computer just kind of throws it. Looking at other solo games, and again, there's a lot of different games that are out there for all the different apps, stores. And just for the record, too, I have an iPhone, so this is all iOS that I'm talking about, or Steam if I mention it. But for me, the ones that kind of stick out and hit my tablet or phone more often than anything else are the game, the card game where you have to get the 1 through 100 cards laid out in different orders. That's a fantastic solo experience that, if anything, makes it more accessible to play on the phone than it does to play with real cards. I think I play the app much more than I do the card game. We have Agricola and Le Havre, which are pretty solid implementations of Rosenberg games, both of which with solo modes. I think they're decently difficult to read on a mobile device, but they're also quite interesting and entertaining to play in that mode. The Castles of Mad King Ludwig and Suburbia. Now, both of these have solo modes out of the box, but instead of just using those stock, what the developers here have done is created campaigns where you have certain challenges each time you play, which I love. Downside being that they're both pretty difficult. So you face a fair bit of challenge whenever you go in there. It's an interesting approach to things, but Suburbia is one of my favorite games of all time. I still play that one solo at the table fairly frequently. Mad King, not one of my favorites. I do like Suburbia quite a bit more, but it works really well in the app, and the games are very quick and accessible. Other games that I really like that work well in the app form, Star Realms is another one where the AI really does feel like a solo variant where you're playing against yourself. Splendor, with the challenges that they threw in, very, very good. Pandemic, of course, is, kind of a no-brainer as a solo game, and it works really well in the app. San Juan, also quite good, and I know that's not really a solo game by nature, but the speed of it and the relatively simple decisions that the AI has to make the app quite good. Neuroshima Hex is another one that the AI is really, really, it's pretty sharp, and it picks up on what you're doing, and the sheer volume of different types of units that you can put out there means that there's a lot of replayability here. Ticket to Ride is another really fun one because of the challenges and achievements that are thrown in there. Again, it's a multiplayer game and you're playing against an AI here, but because of the different things you're working towards, console style with the achievements, it feels like a solo experience. Now, those are just some of the games that are on my rotation. There are a bunch more probably on the other devices that I'm not thinking of right now, but it gives you kind of a good sense. Some of these work as solo games, some of them don't. But what the apps all have in common is that they create something for you to strive for, something you can do better in each play. It's not just playing a game and you won or you lost. You were trying to unlock achievements or get a high score or finish a challenge or get to the next level. And that gamification of a game is a very interesting approach that you don't have to do in a board game, but you kind of do in an app to get people coming back time and time again. So for that reason, there are certain situations in which I'm just not interested in playing an app. First off, when am I? The times I'm most likely to play an app over an actual game are when I don't have the space, obviously. So if I'm on the bus, the train, an airplane, standing in line, in the car, not driving, places like that. Obviously, an iPad or a phone make way more sense than trying to balance a bunch of cards in your lap. But even on the couch, sometimes, or maybe there's a sporting event on that while I care about the outcome, I don't really care about watching it, that I will leave on and then play something on my phone so I can set it down periodically if I don't, want to look up and see what's going on. If I think I'm going to have to move before I could finish a game, so maybe I do have the kitchen table to myself for like an hour and the kids are out of the house, but they could come home at any minute and want to eat and I'd have to throw everything aside. I'd rather just play something on the iPad while I watch TV. On the flip side, having yet another screen in front of me is not ideal. So if I have the option at the end of the day, especially, I would always prefer cardboard. It's more relaxing, it's more soothing, it forces me to slow down, it has that tactile element, and it just feels more, I don't want to say natural, but it's just more relaxing. If you're listening to this, you like solo games, you understand what I'm saying. It's just a very different experience than playing a video game or something hyper stimulating. And even these apps, which are relatively low key, can be a little overstimulating. So it is sometimes fun just to sit back and just play something more natural, analog, as Drew would say. And that tends to happen more often than not. So in the evening, most days I'll play something, I'll run through something, I'll play a card game, I'll have something set up on the table in my office that I'm learning the rules to or just playing through a longer campaign of. If I have a long afternoon to myself, if the kids are out of the house or out of town or just at school and I don't have any work to do that day, that is another situation in which I would much rather play a solo board game than to dive into yet another digital experience. Spend all day on the computer, don't want to do it again. And I think, having a good work-life balance where the majority of my time is such that I can relax when I have the time to do it, rather than commuting and constantly going from place to place, is important and allows me to do that. And it's probably why I like board games so much. If I was commuting an hour or two every day on a train like I used to in New York, then probably be playing a lot more games on my phone. But that's kind of my take on it. I'd love to hear your take on it. How often do you play apps? Do you play them at all? Do you have any interest in them whatsoever? It's kind of a part of a lot of companies' business model now to build an app for their game once it gets popular enough. I'd be interested to hear if you then go pick up that game. And then also how you value it. Are you willing to pay $10, $15, $20 for a board game app? And those numbers are extreme. I know the answer to that's going to be pretty much no. But it is a good question because some games cost $80 to $100. Rebellion, 1775 Rebellion is a good example. It's an $80 game, and the app is $20. Are you willing to spend 25% of what you spend on the board game for a computerized version of it? I think a lot of people might have issue with that. So it'd be interesting to see. I want to hear from you what you think, what you would pay for and when you would play it. And then, of course, what your preferences are. If there are any apps that you would prefer to play than the analog version. I think I posted this on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and there were some interesting answers. There were some games that people would prefer to play on the quicker version. For me, I think the only one that really fits that is the game. But there are a couple out there that are close. So that's everything for this week, episode 4 of Table for One. Next week, we're going to be talking about a bunch more games. I don't know which ones yet, so I'm not going to give you a preview just yet. But there are quite a few games sitting here in the queue that I'm interested and excited to get to the table. And hopefully something new. We'll see if it comes in time. But until then, that's everything for this week. Make sure you check me out and Board Gamers Anonymous out on Twitter at BGA Podcast. Also on Facebook, look for Board Gamers Anonymous. And make sure you stop by BoardGamersAnonymous.com. These episodes are there. Board Gamers Anonymous episodes are there. All of my written reviews are there. All of the videos that we're going to be posting are there. And if you go to the right side of the page and scroll down a little bit, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which comes out every week. And by subscribing, you are automatically entered into a $10 drawing. Once a month, someone's going to win $10 either to Amazon or Cool Stuff. You choose. And we just pick someone randomly off the list every month. So make sure you do that. Easiest $10 you'll ever win. And until next time, this is Anthony, and I will save you a seat at this table for one.